right now we have the pleasure of Weston, so I'm going to read you his bio. Weston grew up on the Native American seed farm in Junction, Texas. Once he was old enough to work, somewhere around the age of 12, so yeah, free labor there. He realized playing sports was a valid excuse to hang out with his friends and get out of moving irrigation pipes all summer long. Yeah, I had that kind of a son too, Weston, but he turned out okay, just like you. His father always told him, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, so Weston continued this strategy into his college years, where he played football at New Mexico State University. Unfortunately, all good things come to an end, and a career ending in back surgery at the age of 21, happens to high school athletes a lot, I think, closed out the sports to avoid work loophole. Upon earning his MBA from TTU, Texas Tech, sorry, in 2020, he quickly integrated back in the family business, and I think that's wonderful. I love seeing these family businesses growing and thriving. And so he's working in production, ecological restoration, warehousing, and fulfillment. Some of you may have gone to the warehouse in, is it New Braunfels or Seguin? Wherever. Okay, New Braunfels. And then they had a tour of that yesterday from 4 to 6, which I didn't get to attend, unfortunately. He's also working on customer service and business development, and he's the most proud of the recent team effort to relocate the warehouse facility to the I-35 corridor that we were just talking about to improve awareness and access to native plants. He's extremely passionate about educating others on the value of plants, provide the ecosystem and the importance of utilizing diverse, and that this doesn't make sense, sorry. And so anyway, he's passionate about it, and we love him, and we're happy to have him here to talk about his topic, creating sustainable outdoor living spaces. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I didn't know that you read the whole thing.
Pull that out.
Okay. All right. Good afternoon. Everyone can hear me all right? Good. Yeah, my name is Weston Neiman with Native American Seed. We're a small family business with a farm production out in Junction, Texas. We've been in business for 35 years, and within the last 3 or 4 years, we moved our distribution over to New Braunfels. And I'm really excited to be here today. I have a lot to cover. We're going to be focusing on creating sustainable outdoor living spaces. I have about 85 slides, so we're going to get right into it. The first thing to start with, there's a Simon Sinek says you should always start with why. And so the reason for me of focusing on creating sustainable outdoor living spaces is the why is that we have a problem. And you know the saying, the first step in solving a problem is admitting that you have one. So what is that problem? Here's a picture of Floyd County Courthouse up in Floydada. This is what I would consider conventional landscaping. This is up in the Panhandle. If you're unaware of where Floydada is, they get about 21 inches of rain a year. They have what looks like St. Augustine grass. Is that crepe myrtle, some Afghan juniper, and what looks like a nice big plastic pumpkin. Everything that's not from Texas. So, this is the uppermost status of the community is the courthouse, and this is the model that we are showing for landscapes. And what I would define a conventional landscape as is rooted in wealth and status, and it showcases order, cleanliness, exotic beauty, and dominion over nature. And I don't have anything against wealth or status, but the reality of how it was rooted there is back in the 17th century or 18th century when these landscapes started getting developed, only the wealthy could afford it. And so it was a symbol of their status. And so what are some of the problems? First, water, one of the limited resources in the hill country, especially. This is a picture from Llano, Texas in August 2011, the same year that we had one of the worst droughts on record. And the only year that I can remember that our seed company had our water rights called that we had to stop irrigation. During that same year, they are watering their St. Augustine lawn in downtown Llano, Texas. So up to 70% of water use is attributed to landscape irrigation. And if you think about that, the St. Augustine grass is from the Caribbean, where they average about 100 inches of rain a year. Llano's about 29. Floydata earlier was 21, so let's just say somewhere in 25. To make up that difference of 75 inches of rain a year for every 1,000 square feet is 623 gallons, or for the whole course of the year is about 45,000 gallons for every 1,000 square feet of landscape. We have 254 counties, an average of about 20 to 40,000 square feet for each courthouse lawn. That's about 7.2 million square feet. So not very sustainable. I'd say we have a problem. Next up, how about energy use? 1.2 billion gallons of gas is used each year on landscape maintenance. Time. How much does it take to maintain a conventional landscape that has plants from all over the place that doesn't know how to live here on its own? Here is one sample of how you can keep up with your warm season grasses. Pre-emergent, post-emergent, fertilizer, insecticide, grubs, fungicides, it just keeps, the list keeps going. And we are doing this repetitively year after year after year. I'd say we have a problem. And it doesn't seem like much, but homeowners spend on average 80 years annually on turf grass maintenance. If I were to go to my boss, AKA my dad, and ask for 80 hours of extra time off a year, I think that we might have a little discussion to try and get that point conveyed. So we have a problem, as well as all of course, the fertilizers and the cost of that, just maintaining a lawn, as well as all of our herbicides and pesticides, which account for 55 to 70% of pollution in our urban water bodies. I'd say we have a problem. Using a gas-powered lawnmower for 1 hour produces as much pollution as driving a car for 300 miles. And lawn care equipment accounts for 5% of the U.S.'s total air pollution. Again, we have a problem. To sum it all up, lawns use more equipment, labor, fuel, and agricultural toxins than industrial farming, making lawns the largest agriculture sector in the world. I mean, in the United States. So, what else could we try and consider as a solution? This is what I would consider a sustainable outdoor living space. This is a Bush Library up in Dallas, Texas. And in comparison to conventional landscapes, I would say that sustainable outdoor living spaces are rooted in connection and balance. They embrace stewardship, functionality, natural beauty, and living symbiotically with nature. In contrast, instead of having a lawn which is a monoculture of one species, a diverse landscape is supporting a diverse insect population and a diverse wildlife population. And there's been studies, I mean, I grew up really focused on competition and in football, and so my whole life was from the mindset of winners and losers. But in nature, the ones that thrive and survive and persist are relationships that are symbiotic, where both people, both relations, both sides win. For example, here, this is a Gaillardia moth on the Gaillardia pulchella, or Indian blanket, that they have a symbiotic relationship. That's pretty clear. One that is very prevalent and everyone is aware of because it's so symbiotic that it's the only relationship that monarch butterflies have to have a milkweed to lay their larvae on. Otherwise, they can't survive. They can't go to an Asian jasmine or a Chinese holly or a cosmos and try and survive. Here's a chart showing monarch population over the last 10, 15 years, and some of this is due to herbicide use, but the main part, at least the part I'd like to focus on, is that how did the name milkweed come to be? Why is it named a weed? Because in common agriculture, it's a nuisance. So we have consciously tried to eradicate these species and don't think of the additional consequences to that of all the species that depend on milkweeds. One of the benefits of a diverse landscape is that you have a diverse amount of plants that support a diverse amount of wildlife. Mostly that I like to focus on is the secondary consumers here, which are the insects. But we're going to start from light energy. So we live in a solar system. All energy on Earth comes from the sun. And without plants, we wouldn't have life on this Earth. They're the only organisms that can capture that sun and turn it into usable energy for food. So that's what we call our primary producers here, are plants. And this looks like a food pyramid, but it's actually an energy transfer trophic pyramid. And the way that this works is that 100% of energy comes from the sun. And from each level here, only 10% is conveyed to the next level. So 20,000 kilocalories per square meter per year is stored in the primary producers of plants. The next one up, 10% of that, 2,000, goes into our primary consumers, and these are insects. And the real big importance that really actually got me fired up and stopped trying to hide from moving irrigation pipes in the summer is that insects and plants have co-evolved over thousands or millions of years to where they created these symbiotic relationships. And when we start displacing them with Caribbean St. Augustine grass, they can't utilize that resource as a food source. And so whenever we start doing something as simple as changing our landscape into something that's not native, we're having a ripple effect through the entire food chain. And you might say, well, how much of this have we done? In Texas, less than 1% of the tall grass prairies remain, and throughout the U.S., less than 96% of our tall grass prairies remain. Over the past 300 years, we've demolished that resource. This is a cross-section of root systems, and if you notice in the top left, let's see if my little slide thing works. There we go. Lawn grass. This is what we've replaced our tall grass prairies with. Native plants have infiltration rates of 4 times that of turf grass, and they sequester up to 50% more carbon than lawns. So we are taking plants out of the landscape and replacing them with other plants that are not from this area, that require more inputs and do less ecological services to the environment. I'd say we have a problem. And to put it all into perspective, we only have one world. We're all living on the same world. We can't move this problem anywhere else. We have to figure out how to deal with it. And we're coming across a tipping point, it seems, that we need to start doing something about it now. Which leads me to, coming up. I forgot I put this in here. I had a little tweak. So this is just kind of a summary. I'm not going to go through it. It's basically everything I said. If you'd like to take a picture of it, I'll give you a second of comparing a conventional landscape and a sustainable outdoor living space. So, that saying is the first step to solving a problem is admitting there is one. And when I was making this presentation, I started realizing, well, what the hell's the second step? No one ever says that part. So that's what I'm going to try and focus on for the rest of this. We're talking about creating a sustainable outdoor living space. First step is to admit the problem. I'd like to do a little experiment in here. Does anyone think that we don't have a problem? Great, then let's all admit on 3 that we have a problem together. 1, 2, 3. We have a problem. Thank you. So the second step to solving this problem is to become oriented to it. We already know that it's a problem worldwide, or at least in our world here. And if you're becoming oriented, we're talking about an outdoor living space. So the first thing that we're going to talk about is, where outdoors are you? Plants don't really care about state lines. They care about ecological regions. Texas is a unique state that has a very diverse ecosystem, or a bunch of different regions. I think there is 11 total, and here in Junction is where our farm is, which was strategically placed there to be in an ecoregion that interacts with 9 other ecoregions, so we can grow a lot of diversity. So when you're trying to create a sustainable outdoor living space, first you need to know where you are and how to become native to your place. What ecoregion are you in? What are some of the characteristics of that ecoregion? Do you get a lot of precipitation? What types of soil? X, Y, Z, which we're about to go through. This is actually my house in San Marcos, which is in the Blackland Prairie ecoregion. And one of the next things you want to do when creating an outdoor living space is figure out where is your sun and where is your shade. Plants have a very symbiotic relationship with the sun, so you need to figure out how the sun hits your landscape and how you're going to match the plants to the landscape, not force the landscape to match the plants. This is a live picture of mine in my yard, same area on the right-hand side. And you can see where I have the shade, I have taller diversity. Wine cups and standing cypress and sunflowers and all sorts of stuff. And in the sunny areas is where you can focus on your turf. A lot of people really want turf yards, but I'd like to mirror what Douglas Tallamy says in the Homegrown National Park strategy of trying to get everyone to focus on having no more than 50% of their yard in turf for ecological benefits. So once you understand where your shade is, next thing to pay attention to, what type of soil do you have? If you're lucky, or if you got a lot of money, you can go buy some really nice soil. If you're where I'm at in the Blackland Prairie, you have clay. Loam is kind of a mixture of clay and sand, and of course what most of the hill country has is this dreaded caliche. So what we're really talking about, the first start of creating a sustainable outdoor living space is getting oriented. What you're really collecting data and you're trying to understand what are you gonna, what's the basis or the blank slate that you're starting with. And next up, of course, plants have a really symbiotic relationship with water. It's the basis of all life, so you need to know where your water sources are coming from and how water moves throughout your landscape. This is a rain garden that we did back in 2012-ish, I think, at my parents' house on the farm. And they have two downspouts. The bottom square area is the house. And what we're trying to do here is understand how the water will flow and how to create berms and swells to keep that water on your landscape as a resource instead of shed it as a nuisance. And here's an example of that water, making sure that you're slowing that down and spreading it out, which we'll get back into later. There are a few different approaches to slowing down water. One is using some sort of hardscape. Two is using some sort of material, fabricated material like an erosion blanket, or three is using some sort of native plants that have a high density, deep root system. These are pulled from the Remarkable Riparian book, and each one of these numbers is a stabilization rating. So the higher it is, the more stable it is. Is Eastern Gamergrass on there? Yep. So it goes from 1 to 10. 10 is like an anchored cement slab. Number 9 is Eastern Gamergrass. Once you figure out how the water moves, so this is just kind of a before-after ooh-ah picture. Once you figure out the water, then the final step is really getting your understanding of what plants are out on your landscape. And so I'm not going to get into this too deep, but generally you want to know what the name of it is, what type of plant. Is it a grass? Is it a wildflower? Is it a vine? Is it a tree? Perennial, annual? How high is it? Is it native or not? Invasive? And where is it in your yard? How much of it is there? And what notes do you have? So the lovely, aka not lovely, Bermuda grass, my note on that one is always need to eradicate ASAP. And there's a picture of that, and just a few others for samples. Once you have a good plant survey together, you've really collected the majority of your data that you need into creating a plan for your sustainable outdoor living space. So the third step to solving your problem is to create that plan and or vision. Have a good understanding of an end goal of where you want to go. What is your goal with your property? Do you want diversity? Do you want something that's going to be colorful all year round? Do you want something that's going to be an example for your neighbors that they can catch on? And this can be as simple as just putting some lines on paper. I don't want to get too much into the control part of this or control how this should happen. This is more of a creative exercise, and it's up for each individual person to think what works best for them and have a little bit of fun with it. A few things I would recommend is that if you can see almost, oh, I can't even see my pointer on here, but just about every designed or manufactured house has a lot of straight square lines, and those are not quite found in nature. So when you're drawing stuff, try and make nice soft curves. You can do this yourself. You can find someone to hire it out to and get very complicated. Or you can use some other resources. There are some free resources online that you can look up to see what creative ideas you can merge with. The fourth step to solving a problem is to create your action plan. So you have the base understanding of where you're at now. You have a goal, a vision of where you want to get, and now you just need to create some steps of how to get there. So here are the 9 action items, typically in the order that you should take the focus on, but every project is unique, so you need to match the action items to your individual project. We're going to go into these a little bit more in detail, so I'm just going to list them out. First and foremost, eradicate undesirable vegetation. The reason why this is up first is because this is a long process and nature is continually changing, and if you get something that is extremely aggressive, you want to attack it earlier instead of later. Most people that give us a call, they saw some sort of great presentation like this one, and they are just so excited they want to get started. But we really recommend slowing down and trying to get a good plan together before just going to put some seeds out, because we want to create something that's sustainable long term, not just a one-time transition. Next, figure out your dirt work, grading, erosion control, and drainage. Where's your water coming from? How's it flowing? And what's your access points? And how does how do you want that dirt to lay in your land? Next, pathways, hardscapes, traffic flow, lighting, infrastructure, any sort of landscape features. Try and get a holistic view of your landscape and where you might want to see a bird out your window and put a bird bath. So where you're cooking breakfast in the morning, you have a visual straight to that. Or if you have a barbecue pit, then you have a pathway that goes to it. Next up, soil prep. I'm going to kind of from here forward, I'm going to talk mostly from starting a sustainable outdoor living space from seed, mostly because that's my experience, knowledge, and I feel it's quite a bit more economical. But you can also do the same thing with live plants. So soil prep is a big part for going from seed. And then next step, sourcing local and native plants. Always trying to find something that knows how to live here on its own. That's the goal, and how the local plants will support those native wildlife. Next, you get to do the fun stuff where you're actually starting, where you're going to seed and transplant or transplant. And then, of course, irrigate and or focus on a strategy for establishment. You don't always need to irrigate, but if we're focusing on the outdoor living space or a smaller area, you might want to consider that. Weed management is always the funnest part of all this. Notice I said funnest, which is not a real word because that's not a real statement either. And finally, monitor, maintain, and adapt. I think this is a part that a lot of humans struggle with, myself included. The 2 points on this I want to focus on is the monitor side, that nature doesn't stop just because you go inside and you take a nap or watch TV or go to bed. It is always constantly changing. And the second part is us humans like to have control, but this is something that is great, way greater than us, that we can't control. So you have to understand that you need to be able to work with nature and not try and control her. So once you have your action items together, which next step is how to actually do some of it, so you can get some ideas on how to do those action items, is the 5th step to solving a problem is to take action and be adaptable. So first up is invasive species control or non-native species control. There's a few options here. Each one of them has pros and cons. So one option is just hand pulling. That's pretty effective if you don't have a lot. It's rather time consuming, It doesn't work great if you have deep-rooted perennials that you try and pull up in dry soil. You know, those roots break off and they just come back. You can also do hand hoeing, no matter your age. This was Virginia, one of our great customers from, for the last 20 years. She's moved on to the next life, but she was always out there with her rogue hoe cutting stuff in her complex. The pros of this is there's not, of doing hand pulling, is there's not a lot of negative side effects, but it is very time consuming and is not effective on those deep-rooted perennials. Next up is solarization. The pro of this is it also doesn't have negative chemical type effects. It works well in killing just about everything if you leave it there long enough. The process is to lay out some thick plastic in the hottest times of summer, and it will basically bake the soil. Some of the cons is that it's hard to do at scale, so you can do this on a small scale, but it's pretty hard on a large scale. It also takes a long time, 6 months-ish is recommended. And some of the other negative side effects is that it also sterilizes the soil. It kills some of the mycorrhizae and bacteria in there. Another one, very similar to solarization, except it's sheet mulching. We're using cardboard. Very similar to the solarization in the sense that it's better at a smaller scale. It doesn't so much sterilize the soil as much as the solarization, but it takes a little bit more resources. Luckily, we have plenty of Amazon boxes, I'm sure. It's a good place for those to go. And then there is always the herbicide option. And I get asked this question quite a bit. And the best way I can relate or communicate my stance on herbicide is I try and stay away from it as much as I can. But, and there's always a but, I compare it almost to trying to get rid of cancer. Cancer is something that is an organism that's in an area that it's not supposed to be, and whenever I get Bermuda in my yard, sometimes the best way to treat that is through chemo. There are negative side effects. They have been called forever chemicals and having some negative side effects on insects. I'm not going to preach on that too much other than the fact that it's up for each person to decide where their level of comfortability of using what type of weed control methods you can. If you are trying to use a chemical to reset something that you won't be using chemicals perpetually moving forward, I could understand the pros to that. If you're not comfortable with that, realize you might have to get back out there with a hoe and just keep hoeing away. So once you have the invasive species control together, and just for reference, typically that will take 1 to 2 full growing seasons if you have something aggressive like Bermuda. Note that just because you killed the plants on top doesn't mean that you killed all the plants that or the seeds in the soil bank. So be patient during the weed control portion. Next up though is to get your grading and dirt work together. Usually in landscapes there's not a lot of this, but in my neighborhood they didn't have really great water plans, so there's actually quite a bit of water distribution addressing that needs to happen, and that can be done just manually, or if you're like Bill, you'll just get out on a tractor and start driving around until you know what to do. But this one is actually, I mentioned earlier, the actionable steps and how to go through this. He actually didn't design this landscape until after he'd done the grading. He let the land tell him how the landscape should be designed instead of trying to make it just for him. And then on the drainage, of course, is trying to slow down that water. Erosion starts at the top, and it's because water is moving too fast. So your goal is to slow it down and spread it out. Find the source of it, slow it down, and spread it out, and try and hold it on the landscape. And then finally, of course, our pathways. A few things we've learned. Make sure if you're doing some native plants on the sides of those paths to make those paths wide enough. And we're talking about a sustainable outdoor living space, a place that we want to be able to access. So having good access and pathways throughout is very important. I'd recommend something in the 4 to 6 foot range. Anything under that 4 foot, it might start feeling a bit cramped if you're trying to walk through there. There is another potential for weed control too, which is tilling, depending on what you have. This is my yard. I wish I could till that fast. And I actually had to do it twice because I didn't pay enough attention on managing my weeds, but we're actually getting into the seed bed preparation stage. So typically you want to create a good seed bed, and if you have existing vegetation, in this sense it was a cover crop of Sierra rye because I was treating my invasive species, and I just needed to till up those shallow roots so that I could have a good seed to soil contact. But after tilling, you're typically left with something like this. Don't go straight to seeding at this point because you have all of those hills and valleys in there and extra thatch. If you notice on the right hand, so on the next picture, on this one, you don't want to plant the seeds in here because whenever rain comes, you will get micro erosion there, and this will level out, and some seeds will be really deep and some will be on top and will move around a bit. So you first want to rake and create a good seed bed, which looks something like this. Notice all that thatch is raked off to the right-hand side. We have a nice, smooth landscape, as well as diverse species around on the outside. So once you get into having a final seed bed prepared, you get to go and choose your native plants that you want. There's a lot of resources for that. I'm a little bit biased. NIPSOT is also a very great website, but I'll show you a little tool that we have on ours here. So if you go to our website, which is csource.com, you can do the drop down and you can see we have native seeds and live roots. This is going to go through pretty quick. This presentation will be available though afterwards, so you can just browse our native seeds or roots, but if you go down to the very bottom, this is actually the same step process. You can figure out what ecoregion you live in, click that ecoregion, focus on becoming native to your place, and this is a plant filtering tool. So what type of sun do you have, soil, the moisture, and notice that those products at the bottom are filtering all of our 183 individual species and 34 mixes to try and match to your site. Then you can scroll through, find something that you like, click on that page, and on that page we also have, is it an annual, a perennial, what type of soil moisture, and sunlight does it work with. If you're on the live plant bandwagon, then you can also go up there to, I don't know what that was, the About Us. There is retail partners, and we have a map where there are other local native nurseries that offer our seed or plants. So once you get your seeds or plants, you get to do the fun part finally, which is seeding. And a lot of people also ask, what's the best seeder to use or how to spread it? I'd recommend if you're 10,000 or even 20,000 square feet or less, which is about a half acre or less that you're trying to seed, I'd do it by hand. You're not going to get much more benefit out of using a seeder. Either way though, if you are doing it by hand or a seeder, I would recommend trying to cut your seed in half, going north to south, or in one direction with one half and the other direction with the other, so you make sure you get cross thatching and good coverage. This is what a good seed to soil contact looks like. So most native seeds, one of the other questions I get is, how deep should you bury your seeds? You really shouldn't. A good rule of thumb is you don't want a seed to go deeper than twice the depth of its diameter. Generally, if you put them all on top of a well-prepared soil, and then you just get good seed to soil contact with the roller or even just walking around, you'll get good germination results. Another great tool we've seen to get seed to germinate is, you might notice this is not really a sloped area, it's flat, but we're still putting erosion blankets out. And that's because seeds do well when they're moist and they have some heat, but not too much. And so this erosion blanket creates a really good micro-growing environment. Holds the moisture in, keeps the sunlight off of it, but allows enough sunlight in and warmth in, keeps the birds and the erosion from happening as well, even if it's wind erosion. And then finally we have our water talk. If you're trying to go from seed, there's two approaches. Native seeds, well, seeds in general needs three things to germinate. It needs temperature, water, and oxygen. And I'd say out of those three, the ones we're most limited in the hill country is oxygen. Just seeing if you're paying attention. Really? Of course it's the water. So, a really quick approach to, or a simple approach to trying to get, if you don't have a pre-installed irrigation system, is to just get something from Lowe's. They have these timers now with a hose bib timer and tripod irrigation. And really this is also more during the establishment stage. Water is the basis of life, so we're trying to create an outdoor living space. We're trying to get the plants established, and once they're established, they know how to live here without much extra care. And so we don't want to set up a system that we need to do irrigation long term, so it's really a temporary irrigation system. The next question I get asked a lot is, who is that? It's really, what is the best watering schedule? Well, that depends on a lot of factors. I'm going to actually give you one, but to give you a bit of context, I wanted to show a nice cute picture of my nephew, Fisher, in mealy blue sage in our farm. And if you think of seeds, it's a capsule of life in there, and it's just about the same as a baby. And once it becomes germinated, and once it comes to life, you can't put it back. So once you start feeding him, just like a baby, you have a feeding schedule, you got to take care of it. So here's a baby feeding schedule, which really is very similar to how you want to control your water on seedlings. At the beginning, when a baby comes out or a seed germinates, you need to be there more frequently. So you need to feed them a little bit. They're small organisms, and you need to feed them more frequently. And over time, they grow, and you can feed them less frequently, but more volume at that time. So you can see you start off with 4 ounces 6 to 7 times a day, and you get down to 8 ounces 3 or 4 times a day. Very similar with seeds, that when they're little babies, they go through different stages. And the very first stage is where we have the seed on the ground, and I'll call this a germination stage. Your goal is to try and get it to germinate. So it looks something like this. Typically, about from the first 15 days or so, you want to water 5 to 8 minutes at a time, 6 or more times a day. That's somewhere between 30 to 48 or 50 minutes a day. The goal is to keep that moisture right where that seed is. After those 15 days, you might start seeing some germination here, and then I'll call this a seedling stage. So we have some life happening. You can back off a little bit to where this is typically about weeks 2 to 4, and your duration should be a little bit heavier and not quite as frequent. And once those seedlings are covering the whole area, they're going to start trying to grow and elongate. And this is where you really want to focus on getting your water depth to go down, so those roots are chasing that water down and they're becoming nice, strong seedlings. So this is about week 2 to 5, 6, and now you're going into the 10 to 20 minute range, but only 2 to 4 times a day. And once you have a nice mature area, you can really back off on the water. And when I say mature, this is anytime after about 40 days. If for some reason it starts getting brown in the middle, you don't have something going dormant, it just doesn't have enough water. So do these other two. The dormant growing season, so sometimes if we have droughts like we've had, plants will still be alive, but they might brown up on the top. That's really, most native plants don't have a big issue with that. They have deep enough roots that they'll stay alive. But if you want to spruce it up and get it to be green again, do one very deep watering so that your soil is holding moisture for a long period of time and that plant has access to that moisture. And for warm season grasses like turf grass, they go dormant. In the winter, you don't need to water. Here's a good illustration of how that might look. When you have seedlings, you want the water to stay at the top. As it starts growing, you want that water table going down. Here's what it looks like in real life. This is my brother-in-law's backyard, Fisher's dad, up in Sherman, Texas. This was, they had done the outside diverse area prior, and they had to manage some weeds in the interior where they wanted turf, so they did a turf grass planting. July 20th, it was 100 degrees, and this was day 1. They also used the erosion blankets and the timers, everything we kind of talked about earlier. At day 7, we started seeing the seedlings. This is day 16. We started seeing elongation. This is day 35, pretty much fully established. And this is what it looked like at the end. We're talking about creating sustainable outdoor living spaces, not maintaining them. So this could be a discussion all in itself, but I'm just going to give you some general tips here on maintenance. One is infrequent deep watering once plants are established. If you're watering frequently once the plants are established, you're really going to support that top quarter inch or inch of soil that's really going to produce more germination, which you might get more weeds to come. So do infrequent deep waterings. Persistent spot weed management initially and as acquired, especially during establishment. One of the biggest challenges and reasons for failure is not paying attention to the weeds and fighting those at the beginning. If you're cutting back and doing any sort of maintenance, wait for the seeds to mature so that you have that resource there for next year. Mow less often and at a highest setting, especially with native turf that prefers not to be grazed all the way down to the ground. It will fight weeds better as well if it has more leaf on top. Selective seasonal pruning, make sure you're doing that in a time where plants aren't actively growing, late winter, early spring. And leave your leaf litter for soil health and insect support. And finally, this is the part of not trying to control, is to embrace natural succession and seasonal changes. Know that your landscape might not look the same every single year, and that's okay. The weather's not the same, things change all the time. Here are some just sample pictures to see what's, if you have some inspiration to do some of this. Here's a Plano prairie garden. This was a picture submitted by a customer. Another thing I want to talk about too is just, you're going to make mistakes along the way. That's okay. Just get out there and get engaged. And you don't have to do the whole thing at once either. Sometimes you get better economies of scale if you do that, but it's okay to start small. Here's a project that we worked on at Texas A&M Central Texas campus. And this is what it looked like later that growing season. Here is also, I think this was a nationally recognized, is that right? Yes. Project that is right in our downtown Junction Middle School. If we can do this in Junction, you can do this just about anywhere. And this is what it looked like after. How many students were injured? Because we didn't mow it. I would say 0 were injured, but a lot of the emotions were hurt from that. We got a little bit of kickback, and that's a whole nother thing to talk about, which is actually leading to my next slide, is that there's 5 steps to kind of creating the sustainable outdoor living space, but as mentioned earlier, we're all in the same world together, and so you can't only stop at your own landscape. The 6th step is and final step is to educate and inspire others. We've had this so much. I've experienced it for my first time actually now, living in my own house and having a front yard that's a little bit wild. My neighbor, which I have a very good relationship with, came by and said, hey, I got my mowers come by later. They can do yours for free. It's like, no, that's okay. I like it. And so how can we do this? If you're going to educate others, you might first need to educate yourself. All sorts of resources online. We have a book library on our website. You can get them from us anywhere else. I see Texas A&M Press is here too. We get a lot of great stuff from them. But also really getting engaged. The whole point of having a sustainable outdoor living space is getting connected with other people. It's not trying to create a separation. We don't need status or wealth to be involved in this. We're trying to get as many people as we can to create a sustainable world moving forward. And a great way to do that also is through art. Art is a great way to express benefits and value and get a very wide diversity of people engaged. And this is the plant art, would you call that program, I guess, that is through NIPSOT. And I believe, let's see, one of these paintings in here or drawings was from someone in the New Braunfels chapter. So that's it for today, how to create sustainable outdoor living spaces. I'm happy to take questions and we'll be around the rest of the day. I'll walk around and hand you this. That way it's recorded.
What kind of turf grass do you recommend for the Houston area?
What type of turf grass do you recommend for the Houston area, which is a coastal, which has higher rainfall? Blue grama doesn't do all that well out there, nor curly mesquite. Buffalo grass would kind of be the only native one. There are some challenges too, and this is something that can be a benefit from working with NIPSOT or local chapters to create a demand for more native options, because right now there's not enough demand. It's hard for anyone to really get into producing other things that might work. But I'd recommend, if it's in a sunny area, buffalo grass, and it's kind of tricky though because that doesn't do that well in sandy soils. It's clay. You should be able to do and try that. Yeah? Seeing? Good. That's right. So buffalo grass will work on there. Yep. Do what? Different question? Well, do you have a different question? Yeah, I'll take it. Go ahead. That's a great question, because I feel like that is the biggest challenge that we face, is really the social. Oh, sorry. The question was, how do you convince or help educate people that have the opportunities to do this, especially in positions of power or status, so they can set a model? And I do believe that's one of our biggest challenges, is that, you know, we're trying to fight a 300-year-old ingrained conventional landscape, and you're trying to change that mindset, which is a challenge. And the best way to do that is really understand what most people care about. And for me, it's looking into the future, and everyone just thinks it's so vague, but tie it to them. How would you like your children to be smothered in smog or not have enough water available? You know, so try and tie that into, do you want your kids, your personal kids, to have a better future? But if you have any other better answers, I'm all ears too, because we need to attack this from as many angles as you can, from grassroots or from legislation at the top.
I would like to say thank you so much for giving this excellent presentation.